Well, here's a face that needs no introduction, so let's move swiftly on to the next. The person that Trump beat in the US presidential election a couple of years ago. Why am I showing you a winner and a loser? Well, because they're relevant. In the US, Donald Trump spent 80% of his campaign budget on the social web. Between them, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump spent a staggering $81 million on Facebook advertising alone. Trump's predecessor, remember him, Barack Obama, was the first US president to effectively harness the power of the social web to win office. And my submission is that you're politicians too, and you ignore the social web at your peril. That said, of course, there are perils connected with being involved in the social web. So let's just look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, first of all. Why might you want to get involved with the social web? Perhaps you are already. Well, of course, it lets you reach a far larger audience than before. You don't actually have to expend shoe leather and knock on doors when you can do so in a virtual sense on a much larger scale. It gives you the chance to see and hear what's going on in your community. You don't actually have to be active on the social web. You could be passively observing what's going on, if you like, keeping your proverbial ear to the ground in a digital rather than an analog sense. And it can promote the good work that you're doing as a councillor. And that can, if you're not yet a councillor, help you get in office, or if you are already a councillor, help you stay in office, assuming you don't want to get out at the next opportunity. So they're just some of the good reasons why you might want to be involved in the social web. There's a downside, isn't there, to everything? So the bad, well, it can take time and effort to do it properly. The technology can be complicated and off-putting, particularly those who, like me, grew up in the age well before the social web. I was a cub reporter on a local newspaper. I had an inky ribbon mechanical typewriter, and the newspaper was published on a hot metal printing press. So I felt perhaps a little bit like a Luddite might have done, wanting to smash up this newfangled machinery. I get that. The technology can be complicated, it can be off-putting, but if you can overcome that, well, then you can actually get to the good and overcome the bad. Creating suitable content and enough of it can be challenging as well. So there's a couple of reasons perhaps why you wouldn't want to be involved. And then there are some downright ugly parts of the social web, some dark corners. And getting involved in the social web can expose you to the unwelcome attention of these so-called trolls, really, really nasty people. Handled badly, the social web can lose you support and ultimately lose you high office. It can, in short, ruin rather than enhance your reputation. But putting aside the ugly, putting aside the bad, both of which can be overcome, and assuming that you do want to proceed as a councillor with the social web, maybe you are already dipping your toe in the proverbial waters, well, a social media strategy is going to have to underpin your day-to-day tactics. And the first thing, if you are going to get involved, is to ask yourself what it is you are selling. And it's worth bearing in mind that everyone lives by selling something, as the Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson would have it. Everyone lives by selling something. You're in effect selling yourselves. Not only that, you're selling your particular brand of politics, blue, red, orange, green, all of the colours in between. You're selling your council by extension, and further still, by extension, you're selling your town, or zoom right into where you're a councillor, you're going to be selling your ward. So that's what you're selling. I guess you then need to establish who you're actually selling to. That's going to be, of course, your electorate, but not just the electorate. It might be visitors to the town, attracting more footfall in your local retail businesses. You might be selling to business people who might be persuaded to relocate their businesses in your town or area and bring with it lots of economic prosperity, bring with it jobs, end the tyranny of the daily commute. You might be targeting selling to other organisations, the so-called stakeholders that local government works with, the police force, for example, housing associations, to name but two. These, in effect, become your target audience, and you need to know what your target audience are like. What are they like? Not least, what are their media habits? If you're using the social web to target people, if they're not on Facebook or on Twitter or on LinkedIn in the first place, well then it's a fat lot of use trying to use those media channels to communicate with them. And the person's age will give you some clues about their media habits. So for example, my old mummy's 84, 85 years old. She hasn't got a Facebook account, and I doubt that she will ever. Of course, there are exceptions that, if you like, prove the rule, but it would be crazy if you were targeting an older group in your community to think that Facebook and Twitter and others could do it alone. It might be more appropriate to target those people with flyers in their local chemist shop, or a poster whilst they're waiting in the local doctor's surgery. So age will give you lots of clues, but they're not the only things you need to know about your target audience. What are their interests, their hopes, their fears? Crucially, what you're trying to understand is what you would have to say to and do for these people in order, if you like, to persuade them to behave the way you want them to behave, which ultimately is going to be to vote for you every 4 years at least. And these things become your key messages. These things become, if you like, your key actions. So you've established what they're like. You also need to know what you are like. And you can think of this in terms of your virtues as a shopkeeper. You are, I'm sure, hardworking, but there may be some other traits. You could be a great lister. It may be that you're massively empathetic, that you want to communicate the fact that you are a problem solver. And you should add your own virtues to this list after today and market these virtues, these traits, via the social web. So bear with me, if you are selling something, here is your shop window. Now that lovely big wide autumn tree is in effect your shop window, and you should be using an enticing image to get people in to your shop in the first place. And like all window displays, this is something that can be changed fairly regularly. Over on the left hand side, what's called the inset picture, you can think of this as your shop sign, and you can use the same image at all your branches, your Facebook branch, your Twitter branch, your LinkedIn branch. Think of Boots, think of Sainsbury's, think of Tesco. They have branches on many, many, many high streets. But whichever high street branch you visit, the sign outside those shops, those superstores, is the same. And so it can be with the social web. Now, down the bottom here is what's called the timeline. And the timeline is, if you like, analogous to the shelves or floors in your shop. And you need to make sure you've got lots of tempting goods, or to give it its correct term in social media, content. And you can remember that images, especially video, is more attention grabbing than just words. So given that content is so important, in effect that content is king, according to Microsoft's billionaire founder Bill Gates, you need lots of it. And you need lots of good quality content, because without it, frankly, you are bound to fail. You can think of content as something that your target audience are interested in. Otherwise, why would they bother liking your page, reading your posts, looking at your videos in the first place? You shouldn't be too narrow and restricted by that, not just the dull old stuff, dull from an outsider's perspective, that is, of council agendas, of strategies, of policies, of stakeholder engagement. Think of sort of the wider community in which you and your local authority sits. And content becomes the vehicle for your key messages and for your virtues. It's a way of telling people what you need to tell them and showing what kind of person you actually are. Content is king. Now here's something to get your gastric juices flowing. A lovely looking slice or two of pizza. Why am I showing you this? Well, because content can be thought of as a really great pizza, just like this one. Here's my content pizza, or content pie chart, I should say, with 3 roughly equal chunks. In the top right hand slice there, we have the content that you create, which has the virtue of being original, which is frankly the only real way of getting noticed. If to get noticed you shout louder, all you do is you raise the background noise, and with billions of people on the social web, that really isn't going to be work. Standout content is creative content. Down the bottom there is the content that you share, and there's nothing wrong with sharing other people's content, providing you don't overdo it and that you share stuff that is of value to your audience in some way, shape or form. And then often overlooked on the left hand side there is perhaps material in another format that you can reversion for the social web, and you can think of your role as similar to that of a museum curator. Maybe your council has a wonderful photographic archive. I'm sure it does. For example, pictures of the way the town or the village or the community used to be. Nostalgia is a big seller on the social web. Now, it's important to get these 3 sources of content in this kind of gearing, if not strictly 33.333% recurring slices, well then at least reasonably even. What tends to happen is this, that sharing, if you like, is way too easy, so people tend to do too much of it. You should resist the temptation to post just for the sake of posting. Fewer cute kitten pictures, if you like, and more original material. So, if content is so important, and it is, here are 3 ideas to get your creative juices rather than your gastric juices flowing. Idea number 1. Use your smartphone's video camera to do a weekly news desk with you as the newsreader on matters from your ward. And here's a hint, keep each report short. 30 seconds to a minute is probably enough. People are more likely to watch 3 or 4 30-second videos than they are to watch a 1.5 minute, 2-minute video in its entirety. Idea number 2, celebrate the diversity and beauty of your ward and the wider council area by posting a picture of the day to Facebook and to Instagram. And idea number 3, I accept that certain issues that you're grappling with as a councillor may not lend themselves to the short form that is so often the norm on the social web. So you can write longer blog posts about some of those more challenging issues that you're grappling with as elected members. You could post them then to your own WordPress blog and signpost them from Twitter and from Facebook. So content's important. The style is important as well. You should always be purposeful. Conversational, I think, is best. Informal, perhaps, rather than the more normal formal language of local government. And it's worth bearing in mind why. Well, because thanks to the ubiquity of handheld devices, you're in effect in bed with your electorate. They could be reading your post, they could be looking at your video when they're tucked under the covers, checking their smartphone one last time before they nod off. And style, therefore, is probably going to be most appropriate in a relaxed kind of way. A couple of other thoughts. Some rules of engagement. Is worth having your own and perhaps an authority-wide editorial policy. Rule number 1 for me, certainly, never drunk tweet. Think before you post. And if in doubt, don't. It may seem really, really funny, but perhaps it doesn't seem as funny to other people, and maybe a little bit of reflection is worth considering before you actually hit the post button. And it's also worth remembering that people can be turned off, I think are turned off, by too much overtly party political stuff, and posting such material can attract trolls, it can attract the wrong kind of attention, and as a consequence maybe it's better to stick to the issues rather than personalities and politics. So finally, Have fun, good luck, and by all means get in touch with me. There are just some of the ways: by email, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn.